You're listening to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall on CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, a couple of stories today. I don't know if you just heard now, but the French universities also coming out now against that tuition hike. What'd you think of that?
Well, I'm kind of surprised, especially when I heard some people over at UQAM saying that this is long overdue, that sticking it to the English universities is long overdue, and yet every other French language university seems to have rallied to that. I think they understand something about this government that observant Quebecers and Anglophones have already learned to their cost, is if you don't stand up and poke them back in the shoulder when they start throwing you around, you're going to be next. Yeah. I mean, the idea this government thinks it's above the law, it's above any kind of logic, and the fact, I think, that Francophone universities have stood up is just another shock for an increasingly embattled, touchy, thin-skinned, and downright prickly François Legault. He's not been having a good couple of weeks, and it's starting to show. The fact that he can't find very many people outside of his coterie, his cheerleaders over at Quebecor, to go, to stand up behind this blatant attack on Anglophone universities, I think speaks volumes. And the other thing I think we should be watching for, guys, is to go beyond this particular issue and take a look and see whether perhaps Quebecers, yes, all Quebecers, even the ones who live in Catland, might turn around and say, maybe these guys aren't doing the best job they can. Maybe the increasingly threadbare excuse of protecting identity or protecting culture, or I know what's you. Maybe there are, perhaps among the supporters of François Legault, there are those who are old enough to actually remember the legacy of someone like Maurice Duplessis, and they don't want to see their province going that way. But I got to tell you, each day it's becoming more intriguing to see how many people are finally speaking up against this really petty improvisational government.
As you mentioned the bad week for François Legault, I noticed in your headline you said you're going to add cheap shot artists to his CV. I mean, the thing about Jean Charest and Jean, that was just embarrassing, wasn't it?
Apparently not for him. I mean, Charest's son, went to social media, and we reported that. You guys have reported it as well, saying that it is beneath the dignity of your office to behave this way. And I think, honest to God, normally the way out to say, listen, I apologize, I wasn't thinking. I think François Legault knew exactly what he was doing, and this is simply a part of his character. I've had this suspicion, nay, this certainty about François Legault ever since he uttered the famous words, Aaron somebody, over at the Gazette. Yeah. This is how he operates. If he's criticized, if he feels like he's in a corner, he just lashes out, and he lashes out nasty. And maybe this, too, is a contributing factor into what we're seeing happening with François Legault. A lot is happening this week. Even more is going to happen next week. And I'm not entirely sure that François Legault, the populist premier of Quebec, is going to have that much popularity to be able to deal with this effectively. I really think he's discovering he's in the deep end of the pool, and let's face it, up until now, he really hasn't had to know how to swim.
Why haven't we seen a poll on his popularity? It seems to me every other day there's a poll.
It's Monsieur Legault.
It's coming, got to be coming.
They come out usually on a regular basis. Perhaps he's got one in the field right now. But don't forget as well, he likes to pick his spots, and quite frankly, there are so many controversies going on right now. You don't want to have a poll which happens, before, say, the public sector strike or before the tuition fiasco occurred. You want to have that in the midst of it to see if it's actually having an effect on this government's popularity. Quite frankly, I think it will have an effect on it. Quite frankly, I'm even more interested to see where the Parti Québécois is going to wind up, especially if the poll is conducted after their famous, or if you prefer, infamous budget speech earlier this week.
So let me shift from that. So we talked about the public sector. So they're announcing a one-day strike, and then I heard the government now says they will have an offer on Sunday, a day before this is supposed to happen. Pretty much par for the course, Jim, the way these things work, or not?
Well, listen, it's very interesting. The last week, Francois Legault was painting the public sector unions, the Common Front, as the enemy, a bunch of villains. They're being unreasonable. We're going to do what we can, but we're going to hold firm. We can't go beyond Quebecers' capacity to pay. And then all of a sudden, they come down with across 420,000 workers in Quebec, public sector workers, with an average of a 95% in favor of a strike mandate. They're going to walk off November 6th, and all of a sudden, in an amazing coincidence, guys, Francois Legault happens to be taking a stroll outside the NADAS today, sees some demonstrators, has a little chit-chat with them, and to everyone's surprise, basically tells these guys, and I guess they're lucky they showed up, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to better our offer for you on Sunday. How much better it's going to be will be interesting to see. But, this idea that, and I mentioned this before, what scares the living bejesus out of Francois Legault is to have to deal with an adversary who looks and sounds and has the same name as the people he thinks will blindly support him forever. And I think he realizes he may not survive the shock of that collision. And believe me, the Common Front, they don't care who's in office. They just want what they want. And by the way, one thing I want to tell our listeners, and I heard Jason say this on the news, that some unions are trying to hold out for the 21%, 21% over 5 years that was offered to the CJAD of Quebec. Unless there has been a development I don't know about, the CJAD of Quebec, the rank and file, rejected that offer. So they too are still in negotiations. So I get the impression that between inflation, the fact today we all found out that one Quebecer out of 10 is using a food bank, and the economic outlook isn't that great. This is going to be a very white-knuckle, hang-on negotiation. I don't think the Common Front is going to bend. They want what they want. They figure the 9% over 5 years plus a $1,000 lump sum payment is absolutely ridiculous, especially when it's being voted on by guys who gave themselves a 30% a year raise. So, it's going to be very, very interesting times, and we have to ask ourselves, does Francois Legault have the temperamental wherewithal to actually come through on this?
Okay, which brings us, and this is going to be my question coming up in a sec, Bill 15. We were kind of talking about this yesterday with Dr. Stephen Grover. We played that interview back today. So when's the last time you saw 6 former Quebec premiers get together on anything?
Well, exactly. I mean, 3 from the PQ, 3 from the Liberals. Interestingly, one on either side of that political divide is a physician, Pierre-Marc Johnson, and Philippe Couillard. But what I find interesting here is the thing that's really what they're being told. From the hospitals themselves, they have foundations, they raise funds. And a lot of donors are very skittish, i.e., don't you think you're going to get a penny of my money if it's going to be directed into this amorphous extra layer of bureaucracy that Christian Dubé has created and decided to call Santé Québec, which is essentially placing more distance between him and his responsibilities as health minister. In other words, the equivalent would be, Aaron, I don't think I don't like the way this show is going. So I'm going to have somebody else do the show for me. I will be in charge, of course, but I just won't show up. And that's exactly what Christian Dubé is trying to do.
So what about the shot, and we were talking about this as well, right, Natasha, the idea that people are pointing out, for these 6 premiers to get together on this, they don't really have a whole lot to look back on in their history to say, well, we did it this way and it turned out great, but you're doing a terrible job. There were problems with all of them.
Right. They're part of what led to the situation that we're in.
Is that fair?
But that, to me, speaks volumes, and that they're looking at this and going, holy moly, it's about to get even worse.
Well, no, but I would say if somebody came up to me who had been the author or affected by a huge planning disaster and came up to me after their fact and looked at me and said, buddy, you're planning this the wrong way, I would sooner listen to them than someone who's basically had an unbroken string of successes.
Interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay. James MENNIE at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Matt.